Tonight on PrimeTime Politics, a bridge too far.
We discussed the bridge. I explained that Canada, of course, paid for the construction of the bridge.
Canadians push back on the latest Trump ultimatum. Give America half of the new Gordie Howe Bridge, or Trump will not permit its opening. What impact will this have on Canada-U.S. trade? We will speak with former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen. Also,
there's fiction, what President Trump says, and then there's true facts that people can look up.
We'll get more reaction to Trump's latest demand and speak with former Ontario Finance Minister Dwight Duncan. Plus, standing up for Jimmy Lai, tycoon, journalist, and jailed critic of the Chinese Communist Party. This is PrimeTime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Prime Minister started this day projecting an air of calm, letting it be known to reporters that he had a, quote, positive conversation with the U.S. President today. Now, this is after Donald Trump issued another ultimatum and grievance post on social media last night. In that post, Trump referenced the yet-to-be-open Gordie Howe Bridge, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project that Canada has paid for entirely on its own to facilitate trade between Windsor, Ontario and Detroit, Michigan. But the U.S. president apparently has issues with that, claiming Canada would own the bridge on its own and that no U.S. products were used in the building of the bridge, both of which, by the way, are not true. Now, the post went on to say that Trump would not approve a permit for the bridge until the U.S. owns at least one half of the assets, which Michigan already does. Still, take a listen to what we heard from the Prime Minister today.
I explained that Canada, of course, paid for the construction of the bridge, over $4 billion, that the ownership is shared between the state of Michigan and the government of Canada, and that in the construction of the bridge, obviously there's Canadian steel, Canadian workers, but also U.S. steel, U.S. workers that are involved. This is a great example of cooperation between our countries. The President asked appropriately that his ambassador, who's from Michigan, of course, play a role in smoothing the conversation in and around the bridge.
Well, for his thoughts on all of this, we're now reaching out to David Cohen, who served as the U.S. Ambassador to Canada from 2021 to 2025. Ambassador Cohen, very good to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Well, Michael, it's a privilege to be back on your air. I've missed CPAC and I've missed my Canadian friends.
Well, we miss you as well. Listen, a year ago, I was reading an interview that you gave to Politico, and in that interview, you suggested that Trump's 51st state comments, might have been a negotiating tactic, a way of destabilizing Canada before getting into some trade issues. I'm wondering if that's what we're seeing here with this ultimatum about the Gordie Howe Bridge. What's your read on that?
So I hate making predictions about what anyone's underlying motivations are, because I'd be just as likely to be wrong as I am to be right. And that certainly could be one of the reasons for the commentary, but it also may be just, quite frankly, with some of the content of this, it may just be uninformed content. That's not necessarily malicious, but there's so many parts of this statement that defy logic and aren't really based on facts. And I say that against the context, which you've heard me say before, that I don't want to criticize President Trump. I have too much respect for the office of the president to do that. He won his election fair and square. And I'm a supporter of democracy. The tenet of democracy is free and fair elections, and you have to respect the results of those elections, whether you like them or not. And I think that's the position I find myself in. That is the need to respect the outcome of the election and to give President Trump the room to execute his vision, his policy vision, and his strategic vision. All that said, though, I always say the one thing President Trump does not have is the right to his own facts. And so when he is relying on or citing facts that I think are demonstrably untrue, and that are not factual, I'm okay calling him on that. And I think this whole dialogue around the Gordie Howe Bridge unfortunately falls into that category.
Mm-hmm. You know, he says he is willing to withhold the permitting of this bridge so it can't actually be used. But how important is the bridge for Canada-U.S. trade?
So that's the thing about this bridge. It's really important. And you've said it right. It's important to Canada-U.S. trade. It's important to Canada trade. It's important to Canadian businesses, to Canadian workers, but it is equally important to U.S. trade, to U.S. businesses, and to U.S. workers. And the way I would characterize this, and I can almost use this as a quote, is that the Gordie Howe Bridge is a vital link in the commercial relationship between Canada and the United States. And the reason why I might use that as a quote is because it is basically a quote. And it is a quote from somebody by the name of Donald Trump as President of the United States in 2017 in a joint statement that he issued with then Prime Minister Trudeau. And just as the Gordie Howe Bridge was a critical link in the commercial trade and commerce between Canada and the United States in 2017, it is equally a vital link in that trade and commerce today.
Mm-hmm. A vital link, as you say, that essentially is co-owned. Canada's financing the bridge, which it will get back through tolls, but it's financing, not owning it on its own, as the statement from Mr. Trump would seem to suggest. But, you know, I wonder what you make of the Prime Minister's response to this whole issue. He did start out this day by not surprisingly addressing that statement because it is issue number one for many Canadians today.
Yeah, well, I think, look, I've been essentially impressed with Prime Minister Carney and the way in which he has conducted himself. There's nothing about his statements on the Gordie Howe Bridge that would cause me to change that. He's been respectful, but he hasn't hesitated to call President Trump on his factual inaccuracies or on policy statements that just don't hang together. So I think, again, the Prime Minister has been respectful, but he's been quite firm in trying to correct the record.
Mm-hmm. Now, you came to Ottawa to essentially repair the Canada-U.S. relationship, but a poll conducted by Angus Reid Institute, this was last summer, it found that nearly half of all Canadians now view the United States as a threat. What would you say to Canadians who feel that way right now?
So, by the way, I think if Angus Reid took its poll again today, it would be even worse than that in terms of the trust that exists between Canada and the United States. And what I say to Canadians is I don't blame you for the way you feel. And I think that the United States has taken certain actions that merit the negative reactions that we are receiving from Canadians. But this is not the first time in our mutual history that this happened. The trust relationship between Canada and the United States right before Joe Biden took office, was down at the 10% level after being in the mid-50s when Barack Obama was president. So we've had this in recent history before, and it's come back. You go back even further in history. I don't know what the trust level would have been. Let's just pick a year. Let's pick a year 1812 between the United States and Canada, when Canadians joined with British forces and set fire to our White House and to the Capitol. I don't think there was a lot of happiness in the United States with the way in which Canadians and Canada were behaving toward our country. But the hallmark of our relationship is that it has been a 150-year durable, productive relationship. It's had its ups and downs. When it has had its downs, it's bounced back, and it has come back, and sometimes it's come back even stronger than it was before. I think, speaking as a representative of the United States, I'm not an official representative, but I'm a citizen of the United States. getting back to the trust level that we were in during the height of the Biden administration and at the height of the Obama administration and the Clinton administration is going to take some work on our part. But I'd ask Canadians not to give up on us and to give us a chance to rebuild that relationship, because the relationship is too close. It is too significant between the parties. We shouldn't write it off easily. But we shouldn't write it off easily. The other thing I say to Canadians is that the issues that Canada is having with the United States these days are largely the result of positions and comments and social media tweets that are released by one person. And even though that person is the President of the United States, it does not mean that that's the way the entire United States feels about Canada. There's a deep reservoir of goodwill and affection by a large number of Americans, by many, if not most, if not almost all, of American elected officials in the Congress, both senators and members of the House, in state houses with governors and state general assemblies, in cities with mayors and city councils. So I'd ask Canadians to remember their friends, and there are a lot of them in the United States, and the commitment that our country has to a productive trade and commercial, military and defense, intelligence, and even just social close relationship between our two countries.
Ambassador Cohen, I really hope I get to see you face to face again soon, but for this evening in the conversation, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Well, thanks for letting me on your air. And as I said, everyone keep their chins up and keep your chins up and your seatbelts buckled.
We will, Ambassador. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Well, from 1995 to 2013, Dwight Duncan represented Windsor and the surrounding areas in the Ontario legislature. He also served as Ontario's finance minister for 7 of those years, and he's also a past chairman of the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority. So earlier, we did reach out to Mr. Duncan to get his read on the situation.
I remember in the first Trump administration, one of our biggest allies was Vice President Pence. He was a former governor of Indiana, and the impacts on this bridge to Indiana, its manufacturing sector, its agricultural sector, were huge. And so he was a big proponent, as was Betsy DeVos, who at the time was Trump's Secretary of Education. Mm-hmm. Both of them, of course, no longer support Trump. But there's nothing we can do about that either.
Can I jump in there? Can I jump in there? Because as you say, this project has been years in the making, even before it was announced back in what, 2014?
25 years since the first formal study began.
Okay, so 25 years. And here you have Donald Trump now painting a picture as if Canada were the only country that would benefit from this bridge. But clearly Americans have, in the past at least, touted, the prosperity this can create for them too. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, all the stuff in Trump's tweet and what I've heard from a number of his administration officials is bullshit. The U.S. side of the bridge is owned by the state of Michigan. Canada did not pay for the bridge. Canada has financed the bridge. That means we financed Michigan's portion in order to get the project underway. There's an ironclad agreement that Canada will be paid back from the tariffs, from the tolls that will be collected. Michigan won't get its share until the full price tag is paid off. So, one of the big concerns I advised the government of the day on when I was chair of the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority was just how much of the money used to begin construction, do construction, purchasing that was being spent in the United States versus Canada. I don't have the up-to-date figures, but, to suggest that American companies haven't benefited from this and that somehow Canadian companies got all the work, I apologize. You'll have to beat me again. It's just bullshit. And, that's what makes dealing with them so difficult. And it's unnecessary. So, in my view, I think the Prime Minister got it right this morning. And I have great faith in his ability to deal with this. He's doing, in my view, a very good job. And by the way, I'll also give Doug Ford some credit too. I mean, the Premier tends to wear his heart on his sleeve more than the Prime Minister does. But, he's giving expression to the anxiety that's being felt right across Ontario, particularly in southwestern Ontario. And people are worried about their livelihoods, about their jobs. And, from time to time, he has to pull back a little bit, but good for him. He's giving voice to people and to their fears.
Very quickly.
And cooperating with the Prime Minister and working well with the Government of Canada.
Listen, I've only got 30 seconds here, Mr. Duncan, but very quickly, what's your advice to Canadians? Because we keep getting these types of messages from the U.S. president. What's your advice to Canadians?
We just have to, my advice is to follow the Prime Minister's lead. Number one, we need to be united. We can't be taking pot shots at one another. This is a threat, no question. Number two, we will get through this. And I have a feeling we're going to be stronger when we get out of it. It's not going to be easy. There are going to be a lot of ups and downs. Today's a down. I mean, and the anxiety, the unnecessary anxiety. So gird your loins, folks. We've got a lot of challenges ahead of us. This is not easy on anyone. And I think, however, we will be in a better place once we're through this, having learned a whole lot of lessons.
Former Ontario Finance Minister Dwight Duncan. Our full conversation is posted on CPAC's YouTube channel. Well, reaction to Trump's ultimatum also leads our look at what else happened in politics today.
From the Michigan side, it was all American workers, all American steel, all American concrete. So again, there's fiction, what President Trump says, and then there's true facts that people can look up and see exactly where we stand.
That was the Ontario Premier Doug Ford listing out what the U.S. president got wrong in his statement last night, but also expressing happiness to hear that the Prime Minister did talk to Donald Trump and sharing that he, the Premier, is confident the bridge will open because it only helps the U.S. economy. Meanwhile,
this is just another example of President Trump putting America's interests first, and so he made that very clear in his call with Prime Minister Carney earlier today.
The White House spokeswoman was asked to comment on why Trump is threatening to hold up the bridge. When it was pointed out that U.S. labor and materials were used, Carolyn Levitt said they wanted more than what was agreed to in the deal. And on another matter,
by protecting workers, supporting industry, and investing in the infrastructure that powers the automotive transition, Canada is strengthening its economic sovereignty and focusing on what we can control.
The federal government announced more than $97 million for clean transportation projects across the country today, 155 initiatives that come after last week's launch of a new Canadian automotive strategy. This includes $84.4 million to install more than 8,000 electric vehicle chargers across Canada, $5.7 million to help Canadian fleets reduce their fuel costs and emissions, and $7.2 million for education and awareness projects, 11 of which are Indigenous-led, to increase public and industry knowledge and confidence related to EVs. Well, to the matter of Hong Kong businessman Jimmy Lai now, who on Sunday was sentenced to another 20 years in prison by a Hong Kong court. Lai owned the pro-democracy news outlet Apple Daily and was a fierce critic of the Chinese Communist Party. His arrest and conviction seen as part of a wider crackdown on political dissent in Hong Kong, and Canada has now joined other democratic countries in condemning the ruling. Mr. Lai's sentencing does come just weeks after Canada announced a new trade deal with China PRC. The industry minister being asked about that deal today, given what's happened to Jimmy Lai. Here's Melanie Jolie.
When it comes to a relationship with China, it's always eyes wide open, and Minister Anand has been clear on that. Second is we have clear guardrails.
Well, we're now joined by Irwin Cotler, who served as Paul Martin's Attorney General and Minister of Justice. He is now the International Chair for the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights and also serves as Canadian Counsel to Jimmy Lai. Mr. Cotler, thank you for the time.
Good to be with you.
Listen, I want to start out with your role as Canadian Counsel to Mr. Lai. In that, I'm wondering what you've heard either from Mr. Lai or his family since this sentence was handed down.
Well, I'm, in touch with his son on a regular basis, Sebastian Lai. We were both together yesterday on a CBC Power and Politics, and as he expressed it, this is a virtual death sentence for his father. As you know, he's 78 years old, diabetic, blood pressure issues, and the like. And this is after 5 years in solitary confinement, which is really a torturous captivity under international law. Indeed, this whole draconian sentence is very much the criminalization of innocence. It's an assault on media freedom. It's an assault on the rule of law. It's an assault on democracy, all foundational values here in Canada, as well as the community of democracies. And so the community of democracies have to unite at this point and hold Hong Kong and indeed China to account. This also follows a Kafkaesque trial in which he was denied all fundamental rights, right to counsel of his choice, right to fair hearing, and I can go on. And I think one of the more disturbing things, which is not always appreciated, is that this is a standing breach of a UK-Sino international treaty. Mm-hmm. And so China has to be held to account not only for their assault on Jimmy Lai's fundamental rights, but the standing breach of an international treaty.
Well, let me pick up on that.
Thereby,
yeah, let me pick up on that point, Mr. Cotler, because you talk about these fundamental rights for democracies and Canada. In many ways, it was the fundamental rights of Hong Kong too, because when the British handed Hong Kong over to China PRC, there was supposed to be this one country, two systems framework that ostensibly was created to protect Hong Kong and its people. Is that framework now dead?
Well, it appears to be dead because not only of this, as I say, standing breach of an international treaty, but the use of National Security Act, weaponizing that in order to deprive Jimmy Lai and other Hong Kongers of their rights. So there is no democracy at this point in Hong Kong. There is no safe space for the protection of human rights. And that treaty, is now noted for its breach and violations rather than for its protection.
Mm-hmm. Now, Canada, through the Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, did express disappointment in Mr. Lai's sentence. The government is calling now for his humanitarian release. Is that statement enough?
No, I think we need to do more than that. What we have at this point, and I'm glad the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on International Human Rights yesterday unanimously condemned this draconian sentence. That follows, it's almost a year ago to the day, of unanimous resolutions of both houses of the Canadian Parliament calling for his release. But at this point, we need to move to sanctioning the three judges who were responsible for this Kafkaesque trial and verdict. We need to sanction the prosecutor in the case. And we need to hold China to account. When China now seeks a standing on international bodies or seeks to chair international bodies, we have to mobilize together to see that it cannot continue to be rewarded for its standing violations of rights and treaties, but China has to be held to account, and that includes sanctioning as well senior officials in the Chinese government, because Hong Kong is no longer independent. It basically operates as a proxy for the Beijing government.
So held to account, China PRC to sanction the prosecution and the judges involved. But how well can Canada do that, or when right now this country is trying to normalize relations with China PRC?
Well, look, I've always said that I've been in favor of a strategic engagement, it's been called, with China, but not at the price of human rights. There's no contradiction between trade and human rights. The contradiction is to have trade at the expense of human rights, or while human rights is being violated. And there's another thing that I've learned in terms of defense of political prisoners, that authoritarian states won't release on grounds of international justice, but they will do so when it becomes a matter of reputational damage, when it becomes in their self-interest to do so. I recall in the matter of Anatoly Sharansky, when I was representing him, and he was released, and I happened to have met with Gorbachev not long after his release, and I asked him if he had anything to do with his release, as he was president of the Soviet Union at the time. And he shared the following with me. He said, I was the Secretary of Agriculture in the Soviet Union before I became president. One of my first foreign visits was to Canada. I appeared before the Canadian Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture. Yes, they asked me some questions about agriculture, but then they started to ask questions about Sharansky. I didn't know what they were talking about. I left the Parliament buildings. There was this demonstration on behalf of Sharansky. I met with your minister, and he too kept bringing up the Sharansky case. When I became president, I ordered up his file. He said, yes, he was a troublemaker. He said, but he wasn't a criminal. And then came the key thing. But it was costing us. It was costing us diplomatically. It was costing us politically. It was costing us economically to keep him in prison. So I ordered his release in our self-interest. I believe for China too, it's in their self-interest to release at this point Jimmy Lai, lest if he dies, as Sebastian Lai said yesterday, if he dies in prison, then it will be China that will bear the brunt of that reputational, diplomatic, economic, and legal damage that would result. So it's in their self-interest, apart from the compelling justice grounds for bringing about his immediate release.
Irwin Cotler, thank you for this. Appreciate the time this evening.
Good speaking to you as always.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Tuesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.